Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 293, Wednesday, December 27th, 2017. And of course on Wednesday we know what that is. That's when I take out the trash and eat chicken. Wow, I don't know where you guys are, but here in the People's Republic of Ohio in the Southern District, FEMA District 3, I have to tell you that it's mighty cold, so I hope wherever you are viewing this video from, it's a hell of a lot warmer than it is right here right now, because I think tonight we're supposed to get down to like 1. That's, I guess, better than 0. Of course, if you figure in the wind chill, it's going to be 16 below. So it's mighty cold. I hope it's warmer where you all are at right now. Hope it's warmer than 1 degree or 16 below with the wind chill, because it doesn't feel very good. We've had a little bit of snow, and so it's kind of slick coming home on the roads tonight. It took about an hour to get home, but anyway, I made it home safe and sound. Had some chicken, took out the trash, and now we're just got the heat cranked up and enjoying the warm comforts of home, and hopefully you all are doing the same. Okay, not a lot of breaking news today, but there are a couple things, a couple drips that I want to cover that are breaking in the last 24 hours. And then I want to go back, because yesterday, in yesterday's video, where I went through that whole timeline and all that kind of stuff and covered the Lee Smith story, there was just so much information that by the time I got to the end, there wasn't very much time to go into it the way I wanted to. So I'm going to kind of recap that a little bit today. And also, I'm going to go ahead and repost the link to that story, Lee Smith's story, so that those of you who didn't get the link yesterday or whatever can get to that link of this video. And I've had a couple people ask me about the timeline. If you go to this story, the Lee Smith story, right in the very first paragraph, as you're reading in the first paragraph, you'll see a hyperlink where it says timeline. You just click on that timeline and it'll open up a page which has the entire timeline, which you can scroll down through. It goes all the way back to 2015. There's probably 200 entries in there. I only picked a few of the ones that were relative to what I was talking about yesterday, but if you want to see a real timeline of everything that's happened, go to that Lee Smith article, which I'll leave the link for below the description in today's video, and just click on that link. It'll take you right to the story, and you'll see right there in the first paragraph, timeline, hyperlinked, and you can just click on it and you can see this entire timeline. And I recommend you read the story if you haven't. Okay, so here's a couple of new things that that have popped up in the last, I'm not sure how many hours, but new to me, things I've recently discovered in the last couple of days. And one of those things we are learning is that Bruce Ohr, who was the number 4 man at the Justice Department in Counterintelligence, met with Steele, Christopher Steele, in Russia in May of 2013. At the St. Petersburg International Legal Forum. So what this tells us is, up until now we knew that Bruce Ohr had met with Glenn Simpson during the time that they were putting the dossier together before the election, and then after the election, after Trump won, he then met with Christopher Steele. So a lot of people are wondering, well, gee, how did he come into that orbit, you know? But it appears that his relationship at least with Christopher Steele goes back quite a ways, and we can assume that his relationship with Glenn Simpson and his wife's relationship with Glenn Simpson goes back at least to 2009, because it was in 2009 that they attended I guess you would say like a forum for the CIA, and Glenn Simpson was sitting on a board of journalists who bring the kind of the journalist approach to the topic. Nellie Ohr was involved in that, as was her husband. So all 3 of them were involved. So clearly these 3 have ties, deep ties to the CIA. And of course we now know that Fusion GPS is a CIA contractor. It's on their own page, the CIA's own page. They show a long list of all those companies that are contractors or do contract work for the CIA, and we now know that Fusion GPS does contract work for the CIA. But anyway, this tells us that Bruce Ohr that his relationship with Christopher Steele would have gone back to at least 2013, where they attended the St. Petersburg International Legal Forum. Now, it appears that Christopher Steele was in Moscow working for the UK government, and he was there to keep watch for any Russian mafia involvement in the 2013 Miss Universe pageant. Of course, Donald Trump owns the Miss Universe pageant, or did own it at the time. I imagine he still does. And he was there in Moscow for that event. So that may be the first time that Christopher Steele got a look at President Trump before he even thought about running for president. This was back in 2013. So that places Christopher Steele at the 2013 Miss Universe pageant where Trump was. And I don't know if that's the time that they're saying that Trump supposedly had the golden showers thing going on or whatever. But maybe when Christopher Steele was there, he picked up some chit-chat about Donald Trump or something, and maybe that's how it found its way into the dossier. Just a thought. I don't know that, but you can kind of see how that might happen, because we do have Steele in 2013 being at the Miss Universe pageant, working on behalf of the UK government, watching out for the involvement of the Russian mafia. I guess they thought maybe the Russian mafia would fix the Miss Universe pageant so that Miss Moscow won or something. But as it turns out, it was a woman from somewhere in South America won. So, all for naught. Here's another one that you're going to like this one. We're learning that in 2014, Christopher Steele produced 100 reports on the Ukrainian-Russian crisis. These reports were being produced on behalf of the United States Department of State, the State Department, which was headed up at that time by the rotten Reverend Clinton. And we are learning that it was a very lucrative contract. So, if the rotten Reverend Clinton was the Secretary of State, and they had contracted Christopher Steele in 2014 to produce these reports on the Ukraine-Russian crisis, we can assume that the rotten Reverend Clinton was being briefed on these reports. It would also seem safe to assume, I think, that the rotten Reverend Clinton would want to know who was producing these reports. It would want to know maybe what their background is, or just for credibility's sake, because you're reading these reports. The first question you would ask is, okay, where's this coming from? Who's writing this? How would they have this information? What is their credibility? These types of questions is what you would ask if you were looking into it, unless, of course, she already knew Steele and knew about his prowess as a intelligence person. So there we go. We know that here we see the possible contact between the rotten Reverend Clinton and Christopher Steele going back to 2014. Now, I'm sure he wasn't briefing her personally. He was probably in the UK or somewhere traveling around Europe getting information, producing these reports. But he was producing these reports for the U.S. State Department while she was the Secretary of State. So it would seem to me that she would not have been completely unfamiliar with Christopher Steele as early as 2014. It's also possible that Bruce Ohr could have met Christopher Steele as early as 2010, because in 2010 the FBI and the DOJ officials were in London, and they were working on a joint operation involving international crime. They were working on this issue with the UK government, and Orbis, which is Christopher Steele's company, was the company or the individuals who were briefing the FBI and DOJ officials. So Bruce Ohr likely attended the London briefing, and there he would have met Christopher Steele. So we can see, along with what we learned yesterday from Lee Smith's article, that the origins of what would become the dossier and the information in the dossier, particularly as it pertains to Manafort, his connection to Russians, that this all goes back to 2007 to 2009, in that 2-year period where Glenn Simpson and his wife, Mary Jacobi, were writing stories. They were really on to this thing, and they were writing a lot of stories trying to really get a lot of headlines and attention to the fact that these American lobbyists, and the one they targeted, who was the target of all these stories, it was like he was their poster boy for this, was Paul Manafort. And of course, once Paul Manafort became joined Trump's campaign to help him through the period of the delegate process, that certainly would have caught the attention of Glenn Simpson and his wife. And they might have thought, uh-oh, Manafort, he's all connected in with these Russians, and now Trump, Russia. You can see where they would have gotten the idea for the basic narrative of the basic storyline, which they could later develop and use and update with the events that were playing out as the election was going on, the hacking or the leaking or whatever, the DNC, and all these other things. So we're getting deeper and deeper into the background, and now we're beginning to see where these individuals who appear to be at the very heart of this, Bruce Ohr, his wife Nellie, Glenn Simpson and his wife Mary Jacobi, we're beginning to see where these individuals all are connected to the CIA and intelligence in general, and they all go back a ways. These people didn't just find themselves working together or knowing one another during the 2016 campaign. These individuals have all been involved with CIA operations, CIA programs. They've met on other occasions in years past, working on other things dealing with international crime and various other things. So the Ohrs know the Simpsons and Steele very, very well. They know each other. They've known each other for years, which is important. Now some breaking news coming out from today. The Inspector General from the State Department, and this is not something that's new, it's just something that popped back up on the radar screen because now they're reinvestigating Hillary Clinton's emails. So now they're going back and they're talking to various people as they reinvestigate Hillary's emails, and they went back to the State Department Inspector General, whose name is Howard Krongard. And we're learning, and apparently he already disclosed this, but I guess it went right by everybody. No one paid attention. At the time, maybe it wasn't all that relevant. But now it's becoming very relevant. And we're learning that according to Mr. Krongard, who was the State Department Inspector General between 2005 and 2008, they contacted the rotten Reverend Clinton and asked her if they could question her regarding some of these email practices. And she refused. She refused to be interviewed or questioned by the State Department IG, and she was of course head of the State Department. She refused to be questioned by the State Department Inspector General Howard Krongard. Now, he also added to that in his statement that he had become aware of Hillary Clinton's private server. But he also stated that he had never communicated on that private server, and that had he received a communication from the rotten Reverend Clinton or any of her people that originated from that private server that was not a .gov, he said that alone would have caused him to launch an immediate investigation into her server. So apparently, as he was trying to do his investigation, and it appears he wasn't very successful because he was getting cock-blocked, but it appears that Mr. Krongard, who served from 2005 to 2008, the State Department IG, made an honest attempt to question the rotten Reverend Clinton, and she refused. she basically had sent a letter back to him stating that all the questions that he might have that she had already answered in what she in her FAQ that she put out. If you remember, when everyone was talking about these Hillary Clinton's private email server, when all that was breaking at first, the rotten Reverend tried to put it away and put it to bed by putting out a document which basically was Hillary Clinton email server FAQ, frequently asked questions. And then she, I guess, and Huma and whoever, Cheryl Mills and whatever, asked questions and then they answered them. Of course, they wouldn't ask any of the questions that anyone would really want to ask, and they certainly wouldn't answer them honestly anyway. But her little FAQ propaganda piece was supposed to serve to satisfy everyone's curiosity. It did not satisfy the curiosity of Mr. Krongard, but she would never give him permission to do an interview with her. Well, Trump still tweeting about the corrupt FBI and the dossier. He let off a major tweet this morning, and he referred to the dossier as the rotten, not rotten Reverend, that's my term, Crooked Hillary. He called her Crooked Hillary. He said the Crooked Hillary's pile of garbage dossier is how he referred to the dossier. Crooked Hillary's pile of garbage dossier and the corrupt FBI. So he's not letting this go. We're not letting this go. And I'm telling you, this is going to be, when this whole thing unravels and bottoms out, there will be people going to jail. And we will get to the bottom of this dossier one way or another. And if the Congress doesn't hurry up and get around to it, Mr. Gubarev's attorneys in that suit down in Florida with BuzzFeed, they're going to be finishing that up probably sometime before the spring. By the time that case is finished, as soon as that case is done, almost everything, unless it's national security related, but everything else will be open to the public. And we'll get to see all the questions and answers of all the witnesses and how that case proceeded, and we'll learn a lot of things. Mr. Gubarev's attorneys already say they know who gave the dossier to BuzzFeed, and we're certainly going to find that out, and a lot more. There's this story that's going around for a couple days. I want to go ahead and debunk this. If you go to the Daily Caller, the Gateway Pundit, several other websites a lot of people go to, popular websites, Truthfeed, you'll see a story there about Devon Nunez supposedly has a secret group of Republicans who are working on some sort of secret plan, to produce a report that's going to allege criminal allegations against top FBI and DOJ officials. Okay, this is not secret. It's not a backdoor secret commission that it's all secretive. It's not. Nunez has talked about it at least twice publicly on interviews. He just gave a speech out in California where he spent 20 minutes talking about it. Jim Jordan has talked about it. Mr. Meadows has talked about it. It's not secret. But it is a fact, and a true fact, that Devon Nunez and a handful of Republicans are working together to put together a report which will lay out and build the criminal case against certain FBI and DOJ officials regarding the dossier, the surveillance and unmasking, and the possible use of the dossier to get warrants, FISA warrants. Now, Nunez says that the investigations in the Congress, his House and Intel Committee, that they expect to be wrapping up their hearings by the spring, and of course that committee will produce a report. But this is something different, and I think that Jim Jordan is involved in this, Mr. Meadows is involved in this, Mr. Gates is involved in this, I believe Rand Paul may be involved in this. This is a group of about a half a dozen, maybe more, Republicans who are building a criminal case. And it's because they're frustrated with Jeff Sessions. What they're going to do is they're going to compile all the facts and all the evidence from all the hearings and all the open source and public information they've got. They're going to put all this together in a report, which is going to build the criminal case for these individuals at the DOJ and FBI, possibly others, maybe in the CIA as well. And they're going to present this to Attorney General Sessions to make it literally impossible for him not to convene a grand jury and appoint a prosecutor, because they're going to make this report public. And once it goes public and everyone reads it, there will be no way that Jeff Sessions will be able to ignore it, because people will be mad as hell. Because, believe me, Nunez and his partners are going to build the criminal case. I could do it myself. Any of you could probably do it, just with what we know. And keep in mind, Nunez and the people he's working with know a lot more than we know. They've been privy to all these closed-door sessions. They've been privy to intelligence we haven't seen. They know a lot more than we know. And ultimately, they are going to come out. But even with just what we know, you could make, at least ways, a strong enough criminal case to at least get a grand jury and have the evidence brought forward, and then let a grand jury decide if there's enough evidence to move forward for a criminal trial. And I believe the case would move forward, probably just based on the Peter Benstrokinus text alone. And we know that the deep state, DOJ and the FBI, are feeling the heat. Otherwise, they never would have had Mr. Baker, Benstrokinus, and Bruce Ohr demoted or moved or transferred or whatever. They're trying to limit their liability for what they know is coming. We also now have a statement, a joint statement from the Joint Committee that heard McCabe's testimony, have now stated that, and I think the spokesperson was Louis Gohmert, speaking for them, said that flat out, Andrew McCabe's testimony is at odds with statements made by Robert Mueller. Now, I don't know what that's referring to, whether that's referring to the email investigation, the Uranium One, the pay-for-play at the Clinton Foundation, the dossier, the surveillance. I have no idea specifically what he is referring to. He's only stating that McCabe's testimony was at odds with statements made by Robert, the executioner, Mueller. You ever read Vanity Fair? Vanity Fair actually is a left-wing website, but they did, back in the summer, back in July, they did the very first really deep, in-depth analysis of the dossier, Christopher Steele, and how he put it all together, and that was really the writing that a lot of people worked from for quite a few weeks after that was written there on Vanity Fair. It's probably still there. It got so many damn hits. It's where they identified the sources and stuff like that. It took the dossier and then kind of did the background on it. And that was back in the summer, late summer of 2016, I guess. August, late August, early September, something like that. But it's funny, they're a left-wing site. But Vanity Fair has brutally trashed the rotten Reverend Clinton. They were doing this story about New Year's resolutions, and they suggested that for the rotten Reverend Clinton, they had many suggestions for her to do anything to keep her from running in 2020, and they suggested she take up knitting. But they were pretty brutal to her. Again, as I told you, the media, they're a bunch of jackals, hyenas. They will turn on you in a New York minute, and you watch and see when the tables turn on the dossier and the Russia investigation, when the tables turn and they realize where the real news is and where the real hits are and where the real revenues are and where the real viewers are, and they find out where that is, that's where they will go. I remember when they turned on Bill Clinton. I remember it very well. They were supporting. All of a sudden, he got caught lying. Bam! They turned around and they brutally went after Clinton for lying about the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So they've done this in the past. They will turn on their own. They will eat their own. They will stab their own right through the chest, just like that doctor down in Haiti that was revealing the crimes of the Clinton Foundation in Haiti, the knife right in the chest. And that's what the left-wing media will do to their own left-wingers when it benefits them. Once they know you're roadkill, they swoop in to pick at your carcass, Reverend. So there you go, Vanity Fair trashing the rotten Reverend Clinton, and they should. You know, she hasn't tweeted anything in the last 3 Christmases, but she always tweets out something for the Muslim celebrations of this time of year, but never for the Christmas celebrations. Didn't wish anybody a Merry Christmas over the Christmas holiday. Nope, but the rotten Reverend Clinton did go on her Twitter to beg people to donate money to her resist organizations. So real quickly, I want to go back to this timeline. I don't want to go through the whole timeline. We already did that. And I'm just throwing a lot of dates at you, and I know it probably was kind of confusing. So with the last 10 minutes or so here, I just want to kind of go back and point out a couple things that were, to me, are critical, that tell me that what we're looking at here, as I said before, is a classic CIA operation. This is CIA operation is what it is. If you look at everybody involved, they're all connected to the CIA. Christopher Steele, Bruce and Nellie Ohr, Glenn Simpson, apparently his wife. They all have connections to the CIA. We know that GPS Fusion is a contractor for the CIA. We know that it was John Brennan who first began whispering in the ear of Harry Reid and Senator Magoo, then later gave intel to the Gang of Eight. Then he was taking information over to the FBI. At the same time, he was encouraging McCain and Harry Reid to do the same. We still don't know who the intermediaries are. We still don't know why Nellie Ohr would set up this little ham radio in her garage, which was only less than half an hour, easily within range of the CIA to communicate even with a basic ham radio. But I believe she was probably using a digital interface, whether she was communicating with Christopher Steele, possibly communicating with someone in Russia, or whether she was just going on the internet, getting Russian stories, reading the Russian version of the National Enquirer, just getting Russian propaganda because she can read it, and pumping that back to Christopher Steele. It's still not clear exactly how that loop worked, but it's pretty obvious that Nellie Ohr got a ham radio, as we can see in this timeline. Let me go to this timeline real quick. We can see that Fusion GPS hires Nellie Ohr to work on the Trump-Russia investigation on May the 16th of 2016. 7 days later, she applies for a ham radio license. Then, 2 or 3 weeks later, they bring on Christopher Steele. So they hire Nellie. A week later, she gets a ham radio license. And then 2 to 3 weeks later, they bring in Christopher Steele. That tells me, because my first instinct was, okay, well, Christopher Steele, they got him working on the deal. He's a spook. He probably tells Glenn Simpson, yeah, your girl there, your Russia expert, I can work with her, but we have to find a secret communication, a secret way of communication. And the way that we do it in the intel services is we use ham radios through a digital interface and a satellite uplink. I would have thought that would have been a Christopher Steele, thing. But it appears now that Nellie Ohr was hired before about a month before Christopher Steele, and she applied for a ham radio license about 2 to 3 weeks before he was hired. So that means it probably wasn't his idea. It means it was someone else's idea. Whose idea would that be? This is how the intel agencies and intelligence people communicate with their sources. Who would have... Now, Nellie is a researcher, essentially. She's a researcher and probably did various other things for the CIA, but primarily a researcher. She's not a agent. You know, she's not someone out in the field. She's a researcher. So this would not have come out of her head. This had to come from somewhere else. Someone set Nellie up with the ham radio for a reason. And I don't think it was just to talk to people at the CIA, because being that close, it would probably do face-to-face or personal meetings, or meet in a parking garage at 3 o'clock in the morning, or, you know, take a taxi to this place, to this place. You know, that's how they would do that locally. No, she needed the radio to communicate with someone long distance, and she needed to do it in a secure manner. Who would she need to communicate with in a secure manner, and why? Well, the obvious choices would be possibly Christopher Steele, and possibly someone that she knew in Russia or Ukraine, because we also know that Nellie Ohr, working for the CIA, attended a conference in the Ukraine, and we believe that she had been to the Ukraine at least a couple of times, and possibly even Russia. So she may have had some contacts there. But it appears to me to be pretty obvious that Christopher Steele doesn't want to give up who his intermediaries were, but I think his intermediaries were probably Nellie Ohr. That's what it's looking like. Very interesting when you look at these timeline of events. It makes it look like they had this operation going. They've created the narrative. They've got the story going. But they need someone with the cred to be able to do two things. Number one, sell the story. And number two, to be able to have the sources to be able to feed it directly to people in the intel community, such as the CIA or FBI intelligence. So Christopher Steele, I'm sure Glenn Simpson sitting back scratching his head going, man, who can we get? Who can we get? Someone with credibility. And it has to be someone foreign, because for the CIA and intelligence to be involved, it can't be on American soil, because that's stepping into the FBI's territory. The CIA is supposed to be operating on, you know, these types of operations outside the United States. So it needs to be a foreigner. Gee, who do we know who's a foreigner, who's in intelligence, who has connections to the CIA and the FBI, who loves money? Who could we get to be the face, to be the cred for our dossier? That's how it looks to me like this all came about. Because apparently, as we can see from the timeline, this dossier had already been in the works long before Christopher Steele was brought into the picture. He wasn't brought into the picture until June the 15th. That's the day, June the 15th, that Christopher Steele was hired by Fusion GPS. Well, by June the 15th, these things were already in the works. The narrative, the basis for the narrative was already there. And Nellie got the radio before Christopher Steele. So they must have sat and thought about this and thought, yeah, we need someone's name with credibility we can put on this. And we need them to be the ones sending us the information. We can't look like we're generating this intelligence. This intelligence has to be generated by someone else, someone with cred, and someone who can feed it through a back channel to the FBI and the CIA. This is why I say these people are going to jail, because we are going to get to the bottom of this. Mr. Gubarev's attorneys, if they don't do it, which they will do it, and they'll probably get it done before the Congress does, but believe me, we're going to get to the bottom of this and find out exactly who all these players were. But we already know who most of the inside players were regarding the dossier, which is the basis for the narrative of Trump-Russia, which likely led to the reasons to get the FISA warrants, which led to the unmasking, which was all part of the deep state coup.